My mom was a singer and a dancer. They used to have like a musical comedy act. For decades, Led Zeppelin fans believed they were watching four best friends create magic together. But at 79, Paul Jones just shattered that dream completely. In a shocking confession, he revealed the band members weren't actually friends at all. They rarely spoke outside of work. They never hung out together. It was purely business. Jones compared it to hiring strangers for a job. But that's not even the most surprising part. The real truth about what held Zeppelin together will change how you see rock history forever. John Richard Baldwin was born on January 3, 1946 in the quiet London suburb of Sidcup. At first glance it was an ordinary start, the kind nobody would expect for a boy who would one day help shape the sound of rock music. But Sidcup in 1946 was still scarred by the war. More than 200 homes had been destroyed by bombing. Families were displaced and rationing continued to grind down daily life. The street where John first opened his eyes was lined with modest two-story houses, many worth no more than £800 at the time. Children played in craters left by falling bombs, and veterans still haunted by battle filled the neighborhood. From this unlikely setting, a future musical genius quietly began his journey. Music was in his blood. John's father, Joe Baldwin, had been a pianist and the principal arranger for Bert Ambrose's orchestra, one of the most prestigious dance bands in Britain. The orchestra performed for high society in the Mayfair Hotel, and Joe's arrangements were heard by royalty and some of the most celebrated singers of the time. John's mother was also a trained pianist who performed in theaters and on BBC radio. Their home wasn't just filled with music, it was built on it. A Steinway piano sat in the living room, worth more than most people earned in a year, and shelves overflowed with thousands of orchestral arrangements. From the start, John was surrounded by the tools of greatness, but the glamorous careers of his parents came with a painful cost. At the age of 7, John was sent to Christ's College, a strict Anglican boarding school in Blackheath, while his parents traveled for months at a time. The school fees were high, but the emotional price was far greater. During Christmas breaks, while most boys went home, John remained in the cold dormitories, one of only a handful left behind. Letters he wrote showed a child aching with loneliness, yet determined to find comfort in the music rooms where he would spend hours practicing. The discipline of the school was harsh, but music became his escape. He would sit at the piano or organ for as long as 10 hours a day, pouring his isolation into practice that sharpened his skill far beyond his years. By the time he was 6, he could play Bach pieces that challenged professional musicians. At 9, he was performing Chopin flawlessly. At 14, he had already become the choir master and organist at St. Bartholomew's Church, leading a 40-member choir despite still being a schoolboy. He earned £3 a week for his work, enough to support himself, and he brought new life to the church service by blending traditional hymns with the jazz harmonies he had begun experimenting with. Locals called him a boy wonder, though behind the title was a teenager who still wrestled with the weight of being left behind. Turning point came when John was 16. He heard Phil Upperch's bass solo on You Can't Sit Down, and it struck him like lightning. Unlike anything he had heard before, the bass wasn't just keeping rhythm, it was leading the song. Inspired, John rushed to London's Denmark Street and bought his first bass guitar, a Dallas Tuxedo, spending nearly all his earnings from the church. The shopkeeper remembered how the quiet young man stayed for hours, playing with a focus that stunned everyone who listened. From that day forward, John practiced relentlessly, sometimes up to 12 hours a day, blending his classical background with the rhythmic freedom he had discovered. Within 6 months, he was playing professional session work around London At 17 he landed a major break, performing with Jet Harris and Tony Me on Two Stars Fresh from the Shadows. Their single Diamonds, recorded in 1963, shot straight to #1 on the UK charts, and John was part of it. While most teenagers were still in school, he was already playing on a record that sold 250,000 copies in its first week. For the next several years John lived two lives. By day he was the anonymous session musician behind the biggest names in British music. He played on as many as 6 to 8 sessions a week, sometimes dashing from one London studio to another with barely a break. He earned £15 a session, enough to keep going, but far from the fame or fortune his music was bringing others. At night he returned to his modest flat, often too tired to do more than collapse into bed. The schedule left him with chronic back pain and sleepless nights, yet it built the versatility and speed that would later become his trademark. His fingerprints were all over the music of the 1960s, though his name rarely appeared in the credits. He arranged strings for Dusty Springfield, son of a preacher man, played bass on the Rolling Stones' She's a Rainbow, and contributed to early tracks for Rod Stewart and Cat Stevens. He even worked extensively with Tom Jones, helping shape the sound of the album that launched him to stardom. Yet, in every case he was paid a flat fee and sent on his way. His contributions hidden behind the curtain. Everything shifted when he worked with Donovan on Sunshine Superman. The song's unique blend of pop, jazz, and Indian instruments needed someone who could make the parts fit together seamlessly, and John's arrangements delivered exactly that. The track became a #1 hit in America, and producer Mickey Emo soon brought him onto dozens of other projects. It was through this connection that John met Jimmy Page, a fellow session musician